Good morning, and welcome to day 4 of the Linden Denim Shorts Sew Along by Sew a Little Seam Patterns. Yesterday, you completed your zipper fly construction. Once you have that behind you, you're scot-free. So it is easy from here on out. So today we are going to work on our back pockets. We are going to construct and apply the back pockets and the back yoke. We're also going to be able to try our shorts on for fit. So they will be constructed to the point where they are beginning to look like shorts. We can try them on and see where we need to remove any excess ease to ensure a proper fit. So let's dive right in. We'll get started on our back pockets and let's finish these shorts. We are going to begin construction of the back part of the short, so you will need the fabric that corresponds to your shorts back pattern piece and your back yoke piece. You can see that I have mine here. The yoke piece, to become familiar with it, has a wide and a narrow side. When you look at how the yoke corresponds to your pants, you will want the wide side of the yoke to be lining up with the center back seam. So this is the crotch seam here. And this is the wide side of the yoke. So ensure that they are lined up in this fashion and not with the wide along the outside seam. So line them up in this way and then take the yoke and just flip it down so that they are right sides together. You will sew along this seam with a straight stitch on your sewing machine and a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now I have my yoke sewn to my shorts back with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now we've talked about it before, but I just want to reiterate that it is important to pay special attention to the seam allowance. We want everything to line up in the end, and proper seam allowance is important for that. Now I'm going to take my serger. You can also use a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, and I am going to finish the 2 edges. If you look at the instructions in the pattern, they will instruct you to trim one of your seam allowance pieces shorter. I do not do that. This is simply my preference. It is up to you whether you follow the instructions in the pattern or do it this way. I am simply going to serge along both pieces of my seam allowance, serging them together. Now that I have finished the seam, we are going to press. I'm going to fold the yoke up and I'm going to flip the garment over. When I press, I want to ensure that the seam allowance is facing down and tug a little bit on the yoke to ensure that I get a nice tight press on my seam. Now I've pressed my yoke. You can see the other side. It has the seam allowance facing down, and now I'm going to top stitch. I'm going to top stitch with 2 lines of top stitching, one very close to the seam and one further away on the shorts portion of the pants. So I'm going to top stitch below the line of stitching, and I'm going to be catching the seam allowance in that line of stitching. We are now going to begin construction and application of our back pocket. So you will have 2 mirror imaged back pocket pieces here. You will have the interfacing applied to the top back of the pocket piece, ironed on. We are going to begin by folding the top of the pocket down. You want to fold it down 3/8 of an inch. The way that I do that is I place a mark 3/4 of an inch down from the top of the pocket. 3/4 of an inch is 3/8 of an inch times 2. So 3/4 of an inch down, if you place a mark all the way across, you will simply need to fold the top of your pocket down to that line. fold the free edge at the top down to that line, and that will be 3/8 of an inch fold. Press that, and then once again, fold down another 3/8 of an inch and press again. Now you will top stitch along the top of the pocket with one single line of top stitching. Once you've top stitched the top of your pocket, it is at this point that you would put any additional decorative top stitching along the back of your pocket. Once you have either added decorative top stitching or not, you're ready to move on to folding in all of the other free edges. You will do that in the same manner that you did the top. We will be folding them in 3/8 of an inch. So I measure in 3/4 of an inch all the way around the entire free edge. I fold the outside in to that mark and press all the way around. So you have both of your pockets pressed in 3/8 of an inch all the way around. And the next step has you go ahead and attach them to the back of the shorts. I prefer to wait until I have the shorts partially constructed to better understand pocket placement and choose the placement that is most flattering for my shape. We are now going to sew our shorts together and begin to achieve a proper fit. The first step is to take one piece of your back shorts piece, your other back shorts piece, lay them atop one another. Before I sew them together, I like to use wash away wonder tape to line up the yoke seam line to ensure that once they're sewn, they will be perfectly aligned. So I place wash away wonder tape along my yoke seam line, line them up, and adhere them together. I am now going to use my sewing machine and a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to sew along the back center seam the curve of the crotch line. Once you have sewn the back center seam of your shorts with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, you can open them up, double check to make sure that the yoke lines up perfectly. In the instructions, the next step is to top stitch this seam, but I wait to do that until I have ensured that I've received a proper fit. The next step that I take is to take the front shorts piece that you have completed here and place it right side down atop your shorts back. You will need to line up the crotch point of the back of the pants and the crotch point of the front. I have a piece of wash away wonder tape here to ensure that the two seams line up. I also make sure that my seam allowance of my pants is facing to the left in the same direction the seam allowance on the top is facing. And now I line up the center seam of the legs, and I'm going to sew from the hemline up to the crotch point and back down the other leg to the hemline with a straight stitch and a 5/8 inch seam allowance on my sewing machine. And now that I've sewn the inside leg seam, I'm going to turn these right side out and you can see what we have sewn together here. So we have the inside leg seam sewn, and we have the center crotch seam sewn and right up the back. I am now going to try these on for fit. When I do so, I am going to take my clips and I'm going to clip a 5/8 inch seam allowance down the sides to adhere them so that they stay on my body, and I can begin to see how they fit at this point and pinch out any excess ease that I have. Now, pinning your shorts on yourself is kind of an awkward process, but it's important to try them on at this point to judge for fit, to see how they're fitting with no alterations. So I can see that I have a little additional crotch depth than what I would prefer. Check this here. If you have gaping here, then you'll need to remove a little bit of a wedge shape here at center back to help it curve and have a nice fit. I have a little bit of extra ease at this point. So what I'm going to do next is take the shorts off, turn them inside out, put them back on just like you see them here, but inside out. And then I'm going to pinch out the excess ease and clip along the crotch curve to pinch out any excess ease. So I have these on inside out. And I'm going to take a little bit out of this top seam, out of the center back. Now, one thing that is important to keep in mind is the stretch percentage of your fabric. If you have a higher stretch percentage, then the shorts are going to relax more throughout the day. All denim will relax by its very nature as you wear it. If you have a stretch denim, you can shoot for a more snug fit with your initial fit, knowing that they will relax with wear. So all I'm doing is going down the back center seam, and if you have a friend to help you with this, it can be beneficial. I'm simply pinching out the ease, and then I'm going to go back with my sewing machine and take a little bit wider seam allowance along the pins, using them as a guide. So now you can see the way that they fit after I made a couple quick alterations, and I'll show you those alterations in just a minute. I changed the crotch depth by taking it in just a bit, and the rear curves now more with my shape. Rather than having a point here and excess ease underneath, it has a nice curve with my shape. Now right now we're focusing primarily on crotch curve and depth. We're not focusing on overall bagginess. If you have a little bit too much ease throughout, you can simply take a wider seam allowance when you sew the side seams and pull everything in. So if you have a little bit of wrinkling here, grab the waistband and pull it up just a bit, and it will mimic the fit that you will achieve once you have your waistband attached. A small amount of wrinkling here is expected. Ready-to-wear jeans have that. It's just where your leg bends. So I'm happy with this fit. I'll show you the alterations that I made, and we'll move on to the next step. So I will show you the old and the new seam on the shorts. You can see here, this was the 5/8 inch seam allowance, and I brought my new seam in to here, and I graded it to nothing at the crotch point. I met the original crotch point. I have not had to do any alterations to the front curve, and we already have that top stitched in a previous step. So I haven't ever had to change the front curve, only the rear. And so this is the back center seam. You can see I took it in, and then the crotch depth I did with the center leg seam. So this is the inside of the leg, the crotch point, and the other inside of the leg. Now I didn't slim the width of the leg. I began about here, and I came in and up just a bit to take a little bit of depth out of the crotch, and came back down. This eliminated, it was only about 1/4 of an inch that I took out, but it eliminated some bagginess in this area, and this alteration is important for me to help achieve a good fit. It takes that center back curve right here at the crotch point and kind of snugs it up a little bit so you get that nice fit that is more flattering. So now that we have chosen our final seam, I go back over my final seam with a triple stitch. It's a very strong stitch on your sewing machine, and it simply goes forward and back 3 times. I always do that along the crotch curve because this seam will have a lot of stress on it, especially if you're distressing. Distressing your denim can weaken it just a bit, and this helps me feel more secure that the shorts are well made. So I'm going to go back over my final seam with a triple stitch, and then I'm going to trim off the excess with my serger to finish the seam. So because I already have my center leg seam sewn, I can only triple stitch down to the crotch point. I cannot move past that because I have my center leg seam here. That creates an obstacle. So I did my triple stitch down the center back seam curve to the crotch seam, and I am now going to triple stitch from the hemline up the inside of one leg to the crotch point and back down the other leg. We are now going to top stitch the seams that we just completed. I choose to not top stitch the inner leg seams. It really simplifies top stitching because we have constructed the shorts in a different order or sewn the seams in a different order than the instructions indicate to make it possible for us to try them on and alter them for fit. You can top stitch the inner leg seam if you choose to do so. I would do that seam top stitching first before you do the center back top stitching. Ensure that your center back seam allowance is pressed in the right direction. Top stitch the inside of the legs, and then you can move on to the next step, which I will cover. We are going to top stitch the center back seam. You can see the top stitching here that we have in the front that extends from the fly down to the crotch point. We are going to continue this line of top stitching up and around the back. You want to catch the seam allowance in your top stitching, so ensure that the top stitching is pressed in the correct direction in order to catch it in your top stitching. Your second line of top stitching will begin here, right at the curve of your fly, will extend down past the crotch point and around and up the back center seam. Once you have top stitched the back center seam, we are going to finish the side seams. We are going to finish these sides in the same way that we finished the inner leg seams. I'm going to use my serger. If you don't have a serger, you're welcome to use a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine. And I'm going to serge each individual layer. So I'm going to take the back of the shorts, finish the raw edge with my serger, and the front of the shorts, finish the raw edge with my serger. And I'm going to do that for both sides. We are now going to baste our side seams. You have finished the raw edges of both the front and the back short pieces, and we are now going to sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance on your sewing machine, basting the two layers together. I do baste at this point and then try on for fit. If you're satisfied for fit, then you can go back over the line of stitching. I use a triple stitch on the side to ensure that it is the strongest stitch possible. If you find that they're a little bit loose, then you can take a wider seam allowance, pull out your basting stitches, and find the best placement for your side seam and the fit that works best for you. It is at this point that I try them on for fit. I've rolled them up to mimic how short they will be once I trim away any excess length. I still have my extra zipper because my zipper was longer than what was necessary. We'll trim that in just a minute, but you can see that they fit well. And the rear fits well, and so I'm happy with the results. If you find that they're a little bit too loose, you can take a smaller seam allowance along the sides and snap them in a bit. It is at this point that I find pocket placement. You can see I have my pocket here with liberal wash away wonder tape all the way around. I place the wonder tape along the fold to hold the fold in. And so I simply find placement, and I'm not going to find accurate placement on the video here. I use my bathroom mirror and simply find proper placement for the pocket, and then we will attach our pockets. I do this before attaching the waistband so that I have a greater freedom of access to sew the pocket on. Once you have sewn your side seams and you're satisfied with the fit of your shorts, and you have found proper pocket placement by trying the shorts on and adhering the pockets with wash away wonder tape, I always take them off and double check placement by measuring, just to make sure that they're not off. Once you secure them to the pants, you don't want to have to pull them back off and move them. So I simply measure from the edge of the pocket to the center back seam on both sides to ensure that it is very similar, from the top of the pocket to the yoke top stitching on both sides, and from the bottom of the pocket to the center top stitching to ensure that they are all even all the way around. Once you're satisfied with that, we will adhere them to the pants with top stitching. We will sew 2 lines of top stitching from the top corner of the pocket down and around to the other corner of the pocket. On both corners, I always place a triangle of stitching to help reinforce the pocket and secure them to the pants. You can see one of my pockets sewn here with the single line of top stitching. Let's see the triangle here. I simply begin my stitching down here at the bottom of the triangle. I sew up, across, and down. I sew as close to the edge of the pocket as I can, and now I'm going to go back and sew a second line of top stitching just in from this first one. So I have both pockets attached to the back of the shorts. As you reach one of the points on your pocket, simply lower your needle and pivot in order to keep the sharp corners on your top stitching. The next step in the top stitching of your shorts after you attach the back pockets is to sew a line of top stitching down the side seam. This helps give it a professional look and helps secure the side seam allowance down. I wait and do this line of top stitching after I have sanded my shorts. When you sand, you want to avoid any top stitching. It can ruin the top stitching that you have established. So I'm careful to not touch any of the top stitching with sandpaper, and this line can be a little bit difficult to avoid. So after I sand, but before I bleach, I will add this line of top stitching.